Next, we welcome John Nevel, co-founder and CEO of Compass East. At Compass East, John builds high-quality outsourced finance and accounting functions. In his client-facing role, John has worked with hundreds of early-stage and high-growth companies across various industries, leading financial systems and process implementation, managing financial reporting, and spearheading financial strategy through projection model developments, cash forecasting, revenue, and productivity analysis. As CEO of Compass East, he is focused on employee engagement and developing a high-quality culture of remote and hybrid teams. John, we look forward to learning more about Last Actions for Lasting Impact.
All right. Well, thank you very much for that introduction. Talking about yourself is never comfortable. And also just want to get a couple apologies out of the way. There's going to be a lot of words here on that slide. I'm probably not going to read them all off. It's more of a guide for myself. And also, I'm from the North, so I tend to cuss. So if I offend anybody, I'm sorry. Blanket apology up front. So when you think of an accountant, this is the picture that a lot of us probably imagine, the little visor in the day. I even had a friend of mine told me that if I shaved my beard and got the mustache, I'd look just like this person. They're an old friend now. Didn't really like that too much. But, you know, with an accountant, you're probably going to expect from me, the numbers guy, to go up here and tell you about KPIs, tell you about how to clean your books and do all that. But that's not what I'm going to do today, because that's not the core of what is the base of our business. Because numbers are just a piece of it. You need to tell stories, and you need processes for thinking. So what we specialize in is bottom-up thinking processes. So there's two types of information process approach that you typically find in what your brain will do. So top-down thinking is when you use pattern recognition to fill in the blanks. Pattern recognition and contextual information, so you can fill in the blanks to make assumptions and make your expectation what's going to happen next. This is typically the easiest way that we go about thinking in our day-to-day lives. And you know, as entrepreneurs, you're typically using hypothesis to launch your business to go forward. Bottom-up thinking, though, is when we're starting with the data, starting with the input, and we're generating decisions based off that data. It's basically a more intentional way of going about your process, and that's what we use with all of our clients, and how we solve problems is using this bottom-up approach. There's a lot of similarities that you'll find, like Elon Musk. He talks a lot about first principles as kind of rooted in bottom-up thinking. There's a book by John Braddock, A Spy's Guide to Thinking, and this breaks it down for me the most simplistic way. Is you're starting by collecting data, and then you're analyzing that data to come up with your options for decisions to make the actions that are necessary that you need to make. So typically he talks about how spies start with the decisions that world leaders are trying to solve, if they need to go to war, and then they go about sourcing that data and that information so you can analyze the situation to make the best decision possible. However, when we think of data in our workplace, this is typically what a lot of us think of. We think of statistical information, raw numbers, spreadsheets, databases. But the reality is that, I guess first, what we want somebody to make it really pretty for us in these charts and graphs. We want to take that statistical raw information and make it really pretty so we can make a decision. But the reality is that as an entrepreneur, early on, we don't have data. So there's no way to go about getting those pretty charts and graphs. And as leaders, the biggest challenges that we find, we do have to get data, but it doesn't exist in the objective format. So we have to get from the subjective. So this is how we go about doing that. So taking that DA analysis that John Braddock talks, what I want to do is talk a little bit how you get that data when it's not there, when you don't know how to find it. So last actions to start with is listen. So when you want to go talk to people and get some information, you need to listen to understand. Listening means listening with your mouth closed, listening to not to respond to the other party, not equating your experiences with somebody else. You're basically trying to figure out what is the experience that these people are going through, so you can collect the proper information. Ask the basic questions. Ask all the questions: who, what, when, where, why, how. And then ask why, and why again, and why again. Keep diving into the information. My team, oftentimes when I am in a meeting with a client, doing a lot of strategic advisory type of work, and they always ask me, they always will say after a call, John, how do you know so much information? And the reality is I don't really know anything at all. I just know how to ask good questions, because the beauty is that when you ask questions, something really amazing happens. The person gives you the answers, and all you have to do is repeat it back to them, and you repeat it back to them, and they think you're a genius. I mean, that. So when you're asking that information, you're also looking to search for the commonalities. So it's no different than analyzing, historical information, in spreadsheets, but you're taking subjective data from multiple sources, multiple people that you're getting information from, and you're looking for the commonalities. What are the trends? And then when you see those trends, you want to seek the root cause of that problem. Get down to the core issue so that you can look for potential solutions. And then you're going to triage those issues that everybody brings up to you. You want to prioritize them based on what's the most important and what's the most impactful, so that you can then take the action that you need. And when you take an action, which is something I constantly fail out here as well, and most entrepreneurs do, they struggle with in the beginning, is you got to communicate that action. Oftentimes we're taking action without telling people what's going on, and then we question, why isn't it working later? So we have to be intentional that when we take the action that we're going with, we need to communicate what's going on to our team. So I could spend a bunch of time telling stories about how using this thought process brings you 3 core issues: process, people, direction. Process issues, people have come to me with inventory disasters that we determine that it's broken processes throughout the system. It could be situations with messy books and people are sitting in the wrong seat. That is the core issue. And then oftentimes, maybe most of the time, it's a direction problem where the CEO, that entrepreneur, is getting tempted by shiny objects and getting people off course. So when we go through this process, these are the 3 typical core issues, and the issue is going to surround one of these 3 issues, or process, people, or direction. However, what I want to talk about for the rest of this time is something that is emerging in plain sight, basically, and what's going on today that we're seeing as a new issue, consistently as a problem. I'm seeing it in my business and clients' business, and everybody in the world is seeing it as well. But before we get to that, I want to tell a quick story about how when I was asked to go do this talk, what did I do to come up with, to actually create this talk. I kind of use this last actions process. If you have a 20-minute ticker on you to give a talk to a bunch of strangers, where would you go to figure out the best ways to do that? So I went to look at TED Talks. I watched a bunch of TED Talks to see what do people actually care about. So some of the ones that I came across were Robert Wallinger. He was a lead researcher for the Harvard Adult Development Study. So in that studied over 700 men for over 75 years. And in that study, what they found is that they would ask them questions about their life every year throughout that process. And what they found is that the men in their 50s who had the highest quality relationships were the healthiest and the happiest in their 80s. So basically, leaning into relationships is what was the key to happiness in their life, not about their wealth or their notoriety. Brene Brown has a very famous talk on the power of vulnerability. And basically what she gets into talking is being vulnerable is necessary to create connection because connection is why anybody is here. It's what brings purpose and meaning to anybody's life. And then Sean Anker, another Harvard researcher, he did one on the happy secret to better work. And in that study, he found that 75% of job successes are predicted by your optimism levels, your support circles, and your ability to see stress as a challenge instead of a threat. And I thought especially interesting was he lived with the Harvard students, and he said that everybody came to Harvard, and Vanderbilt probably has the same thing. Like, you're privileged and happy to be there, but within 2 weeks, you no longer care about that. You care about the competition, you care about the stress and the hassle and the complaints. That's where your mind gets focused. And then a fourth one, Kelly McGonigal, she's a health psychologist who talks about how to make stress your friend. And what I found very interesting about this one is that your body has a biological response to stress to seek support. So oxytocin, a neural hormone, is released in that stress response, and it wants you to actually reach out and seek support to make that easier on yourself. And what she goes on to talk about is that the stress resilience mechanism that we all contain is human connection. And then lastly, this talk by Sherry Turkle, an MIT professor, Connected But Alone, she goes in to talk about how we are using technology to make our lives easier, make our lives simpler. We're trying to basically control all our situations. And by controlling those situations, what's happening is that we are not reaching out to talk to people. Instead, we're reaching out to machines for that connection, which is leading us further and further into isolation. So all of this came to say, so I listened to all these TED Talks, watched the videos, and what was the theme that keeps coming up? These are the things that people are watching the most. They're not coming to TED to learn about crypto and Bitcoin or what the newest and latest technology is. What people are most motivated and inspired by and learning about is human connection. And this is the biggest issue that I see us facing in the workforce today. We have this remote work connection conundrum. So in 2010, less than 10% of people worked remotely. With the pandemic, we hyperdrive that movement, and now 67% of white-collar employees are working remotely. 41% of them are working exclusively remotely. And 90% of the people after the pandemic want to continue that process. And then additionally, they're saying 73% of small business teams, that's including all the startups that you guys are working on as well, in the next 6 years, are going to have remote employees. However, at the same time, and these are pre-pandemic numbers here, a third of remote workers are disconnected from their company. 60% don't feel that their colleagues and their coworkers are essentially fighting for their priorities. And then lastly, what I find very important to note as well is that we have this issue, but 60% of employees believe that employers are supposed to support their mental health. However, the same number of people are not reaching out about it at all. So we have this issue where we know that people want connection in their lives. We know that they want remote work because it creates a lot of autonomy. We know that people want purpose in their life, but they're afraid to reach out. They're afraid to talk about it. And we're going to continue barreling down the train of the remote workforce, and there's really nothing to stop that. So it basically seems like we're setting ourselves up for just a lifetime of disappointment by going through this. So additionally, I want a little bit more of a subjective thing as well. I was thinking about this concept, and because I've been dealing it in my business as well. And I think about with the remote workforce, and not just the remote workforce, but the clothes and the environments that we have today. So when I was a kid, both my parents worked, and every morning I'd watch them put on a suit. They get professional, they get in their car, they drive 30 minutes to work, they be there for 8 to 12 hours a day, being whoever, I have no idea. And then they come home and they remove that armor, and then they go back to being themselves. I don't know. And essentially you could use that, you can use that suit, that tie, all of that clothes or anything you go to, and you can use that barrier when you go to the office to be whoever it is you need to be throughout that day. You can remove the vulnerability from it. However, today, this is what it looks like to go to work. We wake up, we're in our bed, we're in our pajamas. There is no transition from in the mental or physical state to go from home to work. And that's not changing. It's not going to be anything that is essentially going to solve. We're not going to bring people back to the office because people have just loved the autonomy. We can fight it all we want, but and all the facts and all these things, everybody can sit up here and people could tell me that, well, John, you've proven that remote work is bad. It doesn't work. And that would be the top-down essential solution is let's just bring everybody back. But this is, as Matt and Josh, I think we're talking about, this is a tornado we can't stop. It's going to continue going this way. So we have to figure out a solution for this. So that's where I look at, like, how do we figure out how do we be together alone? And when I go back to the last actions process, there is no top-down solution. Older generations did not have to deal with this. There hasn't been a pandemic in over 100 years. Inflation of where it is today hasn't been this high in 40 years. So the workforce the current workforce doesn't really know how to deal with this. There's no prior experience to deal with how to create connection when you're not in the office. So how do we actually come up with that solution? We got to think about it from the bottom up. We got to go to the people and actually ask them what's going to be best for them. So we look at it, you start with listening. So Stephen Covey, this is a quote I really like. Most people don't listen to understand, or most people don't listen with the intent to understand, they listen to reply. So if we sit down and we actually talk with people and we get off our soapbox and we remove our opinion to actually hear what our people want and what they're thinking about and what's bothering them, and they might not have all the answers right away, but if we start by listening and we ask the right questions and we ask open-ended questions, then maybe we'll get some information. And for each person, this is going to be different for every business. I just recently held a virtual open office hours for my team. I had 2 out of 20 people show up. It was a complete failure. However, when I've given them open-ended questions to ask in an online survey, I get novels of information back. So then I could take that information and then sit down with them one-on-one to dive further into what they're telling me. So then from there, once we have that information, we can search for the trends. We can find, what are the commonalities? What are the issues and problems that people are facing? The majority of them are facing. So you can find the common trends and then also determine what's the most insightful. So you can determine what needs to go on that list. And then you can go back and you triage that list. So triage, figuring out like what from multiple stakeholders, what are the things that are going to be most impactful, what's going to be most important to face and to tackle and take action on when you get started with this. So back to, like, again, triaging is prioritizing those issues to be what's most important and impactful for your organization. And then take that action. And I talked about taking that action and communicating that action, but and then you're gonna have to repeat this process. This is dealing with people. It's dealing with connection. It's not gonna be something that is solved in one fall swoop. In my business, we're very focused on culture. 3 years ago, we ran a culture survey assessment and an NPS score. Both were a 73. And we made it an intention to us that, like, our NPS, our customer NPS, will be driven by our employees' NPS. They're the same. And over 3 years, we took it from a 73 down to an 88. However, after that 88 score, I felt really great about it. And then a couple months later, people are burnt out. Like, they're tired. Like, this is not something that you just hit the goal or you hit the trigger and it's over. It's going to be a continual process over and over and over again. And for us as entrepreneurs, as the visionaries of the company, as the potential integrators of the company, that's just one piece. Going forward, what we also have to be is the social architects of the team. We have to make sure people are talking and architect that connection that you need in the company. And I guess just to close this out is, everybody's looking for a healthier, happier lifestyle. And I think that if we focus on the health of our people, then we'll end up with a little bit wealthier environments for everybody. So, thank you.